Hello, I'm Pastor Sherry Ayers, and I am the interim pastor at Zion Lutheran Church in Worcester, Ohio. Welcome to Beauty in the Dust, Lenten Reflections on Ordinary Things. This is the devotional for Ash Wednesday, which is February 17th, 2021, and the theme of the day is dust. Today's reading is from Isaiah 58. I will begin reading at the 5th verse, and I'll be reading from the New Revised Standard Version. Is such the fast that I choose, a day to humble oneself? Is it to bow down the head like a bulrush and to lie in sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke. Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them and not to hide yourself from your own kin. Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, Here I am. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundation of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. You may notice that I am recording this video for Ash Wednesday in front of my fireplace. Now, technically the word of the day was dust, but my thoughts went immediately to a version of that, which is ashes. However, the fireplace behind me is not the kind of fireplace that serves up ash. It's what my friends like to call a 10-minute fire, because you can flip a switch and it comes right on, and you flip the switch and it goes right off. It's not the kind of fireplace I grew up with. This is the joy and the warmth of a fire, but with none of the mess. You know, as we gathered around this particular theme this year and came to call it Beauty in the Dust, we actually thought of a hymn that's in the new ELCA hymnal, All Creation Sings. The hymn is a Lenten hymn called Beautiful Things. It's interesting because I think often of the story of creation where God has made something good out of nothing. But I wonder if that in the end might have been easier for God than creating something good or beautiful out of brokenness and sin and sorrow and dust. This part of the book of Isaiah comes from the time when those who were in exile in Babylon have finally been able to return to their home. And they probably thought that everything would be fine now, that they could go back to their old lives, that they could return to what was familiar. But the problem was that the struggles they faced when they got home weren't actually so different from the ones they had faced before the exile or during those 50-ish years that they lived in Babylon. They didn't leave the messiness behind. They, like all people, brought it with them. And so they had to rediscover and reimagine how they were supposed to live and to worship, how they were supposed to work with one another. Some people looked for more and more stringent ways to show God just how committed they were. They were fasting rigorously and putting ashes on their heads and wailing their confessions in the streets. Oh, but there's one other little thing about this story. This new community was made up not only of those who had been carried off into exile, but also of those who had been left behind in the land. So these are two communities that hadn't really seen each other for more than a generation. And they had all had a powerful, life-changing experience, but boy, it was not the same experience. So they were looking left and right and considering their neighbors and wondering, what will it look like now to be faithful, to be home, to be the people of God. I don't know about you, but I can hear some of our own experience in this story. What will it be like when we try to emerge from this pandemic? How have we been changed by this? And it is true, not everyone has had the same experience in these months. Now we have to figure out how will we live and serve and worship together going forward? What will we do with the messiness of being part of a live in-person community again? My favorite part of this Isaiah text is when God, through the prophet, addresses the people directly and calls them to think again about how they are called to love God and neighbor. God asks, "Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free?" In other words, fasting is not about our trying to prove our worthiness to God by how much we are willing to give up for Lent. It's not about working to get gold stars on our Lenten growth chart or to impress our neighbors. Fasting, while it seems like such an individual thing, is actually about community. It's about justice and mercy and empathy and hope and sharing. It's about being called to journey with a God who can indeed make beautiful things out of the messiness and the brokenness, out of the ashes, out of the dust. Blessed Lent.